Greetings yet again. I think I wanted to do an off-the-cuff response to my own video just to explore, go a little bit more in depth about this whole idea of free will, determinism, and I want to talk a little about so-called utilitarian arguments. Now, I'm kind of just doing this for myself. I know most people aren't interested in this, but so be it. So, the reason why I had that snippet of Sam Harris talking about free will in the video is because I was trying to demonstrate a point, well, several points, but I talked about sort of biological trajectories and how we sort of fall along these lines, whether it comes to our nutritional habits, metabolism, reproductive habits, and so on and so forth. And that's part of what's essentially a deterministic worldview. But when you talk about free will, this seems to bring about a lot of people being upset. Now, some people, or people in general, may or may not have understood what he said. I'm going to put it in a different way that might be a little more clear. So, even without detailed scientific knowledge, it's pretty easy to ascertain that we don't have this thing called free will. That, for example, we are essentially not a self, but the sum of many, many different physical processes and components. But we still have this idea because of our cognitive functions of a kind of a self, of an I, of a person who makes choices, and that we're free to choose anytime we want to do one thing or the other. Now, this, when you really think about it, is patently false. I mean, but it's a thought that we entertain. I think for a lot of reasons. A lot of it might be human beings' desire, or inclination to engage in wishful thinking. Then it seems that way, doesn't it? It really does seem that way. But on face value. But if you examine the issue, it's very clear that this is not the case. And we'll talk about the consequences of that a little bit later. So, how can you tell that you don't have free will? Well, it's pretty simple. You have to look at the fact that you are the sum of, as I said, various physical components and processes going on in your body, but also in the external world. A stream of causes of which you are not aware. And those are the terms that Sam Harris uses. But what does that really mean? And in the video I say, you are your brain. We are our brains. Well, for one thing, before going into that, you can think of it in this way. I mean, did you choose to be born? I mean, the fact of your birth was the result of processes outside of your control and outside of your ability to choose. Now, let's fast forward a couple of years. When you were 1 or 2, you were rolling about in a cradle, or crying to get attention, to gain access to sustenance, or whatever. I mean, it's highly doubtful you have recollections of that to begin with. But even so, did you choose to do that? I mean, when you were a 1-year-old, did you choose to roll over on your left side as opposed to your right? Did you choose to raise your right hand as opposed to your left? Or does free will only enter into the equation when you become an adult or a teenager? There are a lot of reasons as to why this should be doubted, that we have free will. Those are just a few of them. But we feel like we're in charge, very much so, and we feel like we're that person. I mean, for example, when you were that 1-year-old, and you're the person you are now, that's the same person, right? But in fact, you're not. Our memories are flawed. We don't recall things correctly often. And more to the point, we've matured. But what's really interesting is on a molecular level, and even on an atomic level, we are not the same people we used to be. We have this, Stardusk is not the same Stardust. The Stardust of today is not the same Stardust of 3 or 4 years ago, and not the same as 13, and not the same as 35 years ago. And it's not just the process of maturation. There's that as, of course, that's part of it, but on a much more basic level, in terms of our molecular breakdown and atomic structure, we're not the same people. So that also lends credence to this idea that we don't have free will, that we are essentially constantly changing. Now, the brain too changes as well. But to say you have free will, to say that you are free to choose one thing or the other, is to say that you are essentially lie outside a lot of a causal chain of events that can have as I discussed in the video, a set of variables, causal variables, that can have an effect on your behavioral outcomes. But I mean, what does that really mean? Now, if you're a person of normal health and stature, I guess that on face value, that seems to make sense, that you're free to choose. But what about someone who has brain deficiencies? I mean, I'll give another example. Language. Language is a lot of people find it really boring, but the fact is we wouldn't be human beings without language. And because of that, language is sort of the defining human characteristic. Now, there are different kinds of language disorders. Apraxia, aphasia, I'm not going to go into the boring details, but they affect your ability to speak, perceive, and read words. And we know when people have damage done to certain areas of the brain, say within the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is, there are 4 lobes. It's part of the cerebral hemisphere, and it's primarily responsible for that kind of stuff: the auditory, visual memories, language, hearing, speech, things like that. And there's a particular area called Wernicke's area, Wernicke's area, that is really the center of understanding spoken language. And there are other areas. I mean, there the Broca's occipital lobe within the occipital lobe, and so on and so forth. But if any of these areas sustain damage, some people will no longer be able to produce speech or understand speech, or both, or read or write. Now, what does that mean to say you're free to choose, that you have free will? A person with damage to Wernicke's area, or Broca's area, that has some kind of speech defect, is he free to speak? What happened there? There was damage done to a specific area of his brain, and now he can't speak anymore, or he can only speak partially, or he can't decode other people's speech, and so on and so forth. So that raises the question: is he free to choose to speak or not? Apparently not, since he, in some capacity, has lost either that ability to speak or to understand, or both. So a choice has been eliminated. Now, you can say he's still free to choose X, Y, Z, I guess, but the fact that damage done to a physical organ, his brain, has eliminated his ability to participate in what is the defining and sort of salient quality of being a human being, is very suggestive, if not almost hard evidence, that we do not choose. We don't choose things, that we are in fact products of external causes and internal causes that we are not aware of. So to say that we can choose, we have free will to do what we want to do, is also to simultaneously say that a man with damage to both Wernicke's area and Broca's area in the brain, who has totally garbled and just messed up speech and can't understand other people's speech, that he's still free. He's free to choose that or not, but clearly he's not. So everything we do is subject to scores of physical processes that we are not aware of. The man who sustained brain damage to, say, Broca's or Wernicke's area, he that happened to him. Let's say he was in a car accident, someone rammed him, who knows? He's lost choice due to external causes. But even, I mean, there's automatic motor function. But put it this way, there are states of physical being that you have really no control over. Let's say you're crossing the street and you have a very close call with a hit and run driver. Potentially could have. I mean, it's just he shears off a bit of your skin in the process, and you jump back, and you're just pumped up, filled with adrenaline, and you're just your head is moving back and forth and back and forth, and it's such a close call that you're just thinking about the whole day. You go to work and you can't really concentrate because you thought, shit, I could have lost my life today. It was that close. So that physical event outside of your control has set in motion a series of physical processes in your bodies, pumping out tons of noradrenaline, heightened sense of awareness. You can't suppress the thought, at least for the rest of the day, that you could have been killed. All these things that are going on, which will have an effect on your behavioral outcome. For example, maybe you work a hard job in an office that requires a lot of attention to detail, and that's just preoccupying you, and you can't do it. You can say, well, you're free to choose that, but a person who's in that state of mind, due to, say, a near death experience, I don't mean of that sort, but of he almost was killed, will not be able to concentrate in many cases, or in this particular case. Someone with a different genetic makeup might well be able to do so, but in the case of a person with a certain set of genes, a certain environment that he grew up in, maybe he wouldn't. Is that person free to choose to concentrate, to ignore his almost being killed in the morning on the way to work? This should seem a non sequitur, that idea, at least that kind of free will, doesn't exist. We're constantly subject to and exposed to external forces that have a profound effect on us, and then us, that is we are simply the sum of many physical processes and and components that are engaged in or engage in these processes. That is what we are as animals, all animals in that way. Now, we happen to have higher cognitive functions than most animals, it appears. And I think that's what lends itself to this idea of an I. Even though this I is completely mutable. And I mean, like I said, a couple of years ago, that wasn't you, not on an atomic or molecular level. So, and consequently, the brain is neuroplasticity is well documented. I mean, the constant additions being added, but all things being equal, once again, I mean, if you have an itch on your leg and it's easily accessible by both your right or left hand, you happen to use your right hand, you can't really account for why you decided to use your right hand. If you had free will, if you were aware of all the things you're doing, you could say, I chose my right hand because blah, 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 and so on and so forth. That's not how human motor function works. And ultimately, that's not even how our thought processes work in complex thought. We're affected by external causes, which then bring about a series of processes in the brain that can affect what you do. So the illusion of choice is understandable, but it's clearly not there. Now, that probably was pretty boring to a lot of people, but regardless, it is what it is. So you have that, and once again, I'll probably go back to the brain. But so you have this illusion of choice. Now, once again, people are going to they're always going to be skeptics about this, but I assure you that if you had damage to Wernicke's area or Broca's area, that you would have some speech defects, some serious ones possibly. Let's hope not. Knock on wood. No one wants that. Would you still be free to choose to write things? The comments saying, well, determinism is this or that. No, you wouldn't, because in some cases, depending on what specific area of Wernicke's area or Broca's area that was damaged, you wouldn't even be able to write words anymore Are you choosing not to write words? I mean, so what it really boils down to is not, some people just flat out don't understand this argument, it seems. Others, I think, understand it, but dismiss it because of a classic counter argument, which is the utilitarian argument. Utilitarian arguments are very common and they're very popular. And they are so for understandable reasons, but they're not good logic. They're not good modes of argumentation. So if someone says, for example, things can't be deterministic because then people would go around running and killing and whatever. Whether that's true or not is another question, but that doesn't have any effect on whether or not the universe and consequently living creatures follow. The universe is deterministic, and consequently living creatures, including human beings, are subject to probabilistic behavioral patterns. As I said, determinism is basically just probabilistic interpretations. If you want to look at it as an interpretation of human behavior, that's well documented. So that is not an argument to say that, or it is an argument, it's not a very good one, to say that, if people believe this, then everything would be for nothing and blah, blah, blah. And you'll hear this argument often from religionists. So if someone were to say to Stardust, to me, say, Stardust, your belief in Thor is incorrect. I say, but no, but Thor, blots out the infernal orb of the fiery orb of the sun and brings us rain, cool rain, and cloudy weather, and he makes me feel good. And this person said, well, Stardust, but Thor still doesn't exist. No. And I say, no. He has to exist because, I can't live without him. But see, my argument there is not a good one because I'm just saying, well, he makes me feel good. But that's not an argument for the existence of Thor any more than saying that people will do X, Y, Z if we actually are without free will and we live in a deterministic universe. I mean, that's not relevant to the argument whatsoever. It's only relevant as much as there might be some element of human beings such that we have to pretend that we are in charge and pretend that we have choice. It just seems so patently obvious, though, when you just think about the range of differences in human beings. So, for example, Olympic sprinters, many of whom hail from Jamaica, have a certain gene that gives them many, many more fast twitch, that is, white muscle fibers, particularly in the quadricep area, which allows them to excel. I think something like 70 to 75% of them have that in sprinting. That I presume I don't have that, and most of you probably don't have. Maybe some of you do. So could we say we could choose to be that? Could we choose to be an Olympic sprinter without the requisite genetics? Do you choose to have your genes? I mean, these are all relevant questions because when we're honest about these things, we realize that there really isn't a lot of choice, not in the conventional sense. That doesn't mean we, as Sam Harris said, that we just stop doing stuff. I mean, we just kind of lie down and just that in itself is a choice, as he says. Right? That's a choice. But what's important here is that we try to be intellectually honest about this. Now, and the point of that video, in large measure, more than anything else, was to just show that these kind of behavioral trajectories that we're on are predictable given certain environments. So, what happens when the Montreal police force goes on strike? What happens if a certain group of people are, exposed to a certain kind of war, and you have certain, cultural memes in place, and this and that. A lot of these things are predictable. And what happens to women when, when a social safety nets aren't involved, what kind of labor and job choices they make and things like that. I mean, these are probabilistic outcomes based on external circumstances and causal links that really have nothing to do with the individuals. That's basically what I mean, say, for example, by evolutionary autopilot. These things follow a certain trajectory. This idea that you can sort of just will yourself to do certain things. Most of us don't even have an explanation. I mean, we've all procrastinated. In fact, I'm a high lord of procrastination. But most of us don't know then when we finally decide to do things. Why didn't I do it 1.3 hours earlier? There's no, you didn't, but you can't account for that. Or why did I decide not to procrastinate today? Well, you could come up with all kinds of reasons and then say I chose to do it because I didn't want to delay things. I need to get to the post office on time. Okay, but I'm sure you've had days when you postponed that and there was no particular reason why, but you can't explain that either. So the free will argument well, it doesn't really, there's no evidence to support it. More importantly, it's not really relevant because it does seem like on some level we need to pretend about these things. We need to pretend that we have control. A lot of this is human anxiety, right? It's the reason why a lot of religionists cling to their respective deities. It's the reason why, I mean, now we're getting into other fields topics, but I think humans, men and women, suffer from a cosmic aloneness, not loneliness, but aloneness, the recognition that they are alone in the universe. And that is true. It's true on the deepest level. Consciousness, even though it's completely borne out by physical processes in the brain, nonetheless is there. And your consciousness is separated from my consciousness, and my consciousness is separated from that person, and so on and so forth. I think people recognize that and feel that. And this generates a kind of, and this is just my supposition here, I'm going away from sort of more scientifically proven stuff to my own interpretations and supposition here. But this idea that we're alone, not loneliness. Loneliness is a feeling rather than a state, right? We're in a state of alonehood, if you will, and it's ineluctable, right? I mean, we can't escape it, and that ineluctability lends itself very well to such a thought as, we have choice and free will and we're in control. People want to feel like they're in control of their own destiny, even though there's so little evidence to suggest that they in fact are. And in particular, I think this is where a lot of this, well, going back to the love meme, people have to deal with the state of aloneness, and they don't want to. I think love in lieu of religion or in lieu of other things that alternatively could be appealed to serves as a kind of ersatz religion, essentially, a kind of faux religion. People can, and everyone latches onto it. I used to too. I think we all did in our earlier days believe in the religion of love because that somehow assuages that feeling of sort of cosmic aloneness, not loneliness. I mean, loneliness is a symptom of it, but that's not what that actually is. So drifts into other territory here, but that's part of it, I think, and I think that's where a lot of as well this sort of human idealism stems from. This idea that we're special and we can change the world and ourselves, and no one's made the claim that change isn't possible. But in terms of probabilistic trajectories that people are willing to embark on, the likelihood of certain outcomes is far, far slimmer than other outcomes because, once again, deterministic universe, follows that we follow certain trajectories more readily than others. More simply put, I mean, so for example, as going your own way, that might be a trajectory that is, I'm not saying there's a gene for that, but sort of you as an individual who's decided to go your own way is responsive in such a way that you can do that, whereas many men can't. for all sorts of reasons, environmental, genetic, all these other things. But you can do that, and but that's still reactive. That's not adaptive. I mean, you're simply reacting to certain circumstances. You haven't grown wings and you can't fly, and you haven't discovered how to inseminate the air, or any of these things that, I mean, that's totally absurd, but any of these things that would be really so some kind of adaptive, really outside the spectrum of just sort of pure reaction. So no, I think we do follow certain trajectories, and this idealism is a serious problem in human beings, because it affects our ability to think clearly about things. It gives us, I think ultimately it helps support the illusion of free will, this idea that we're in charge constantly and we make choices. And I mean, like I said, that doesn't take a lot of thought to be refuted. Just think about anyone who's subject to a long causal chain of events outside their control. Someone who was abused as a child, sexually abused as a child, got beaten, and so on and so forth. That's going to have a profoundly different outcome on different people depending on their genetic composition. And you can't say that that particular outcome for, say, person A, which is different to, say, person B, he chose that outcome. But of course, then you say you can choose how to deal with it. Well, that's only partially true, because I mean, there's epigenetics as well. So he has this genetic base, and then you have the epigenetic influences. So that too will be limited. And then maybe that add into when it ceased and when it started. And I mean, it's just this long chain of causal events outside your control. So it should be obvious that this is just a no-brainer. But the real problem, I think, is it's not that we don't have free will. It's that we're just sort of saddled with idealism about the human condition. And part of that's been beneficial. I mean, it's the desire to create, to invent, to be the discoverer, if you will, to trailblaze, basically. I mean, that's part of it. But the negative of that, the negative side of that, is this belief that we're special, that our feelings are special, and that our feelings, say that the feelings of love, the biochemistry of love, that somehow has an almost mystic quality to it. And then you add that into the equation of sort of the cosmic aloneness that we all face. And that can be quite daunting to overcome. But I think that's all well and good. And so people might be asking me, or have asked me in the past, well, yeah, you're so negative, you're just saying nothing can change, you're not doing shit. Okay, fair enough. My argument against that is simply that we can do things, but we can never be as effective in doing things, in affecting change, if you want to call it that, if we're intellectually dishonest with ourselves, others, and the world. If we adhere to, say, the mystic love bond, if we adhere to fallacious ideas that of the self, of I, of free will, if let's have an honest, I mean, this will never happen, especially not in the so-called manosphere, but let's have an honest discussion of the state of humanity, the way humanity, that is Homo sapiens, actually is, not befuddled by idealism, and not saddled with wishful thinking, not using utilitarian arguments that if this is so, then we can't have that. No, just let's just do that at some point in time. Now, I don't think that's ever going to happen, because once again, human beings follow probabilistic trajectories on things, and because of that, it's highly unlikely that humans are really going to turn around, in a majority at least, and start practicing intellectual honesty. I just don't see that happening. But that's, I guess, my wishful thinking. Well, I don't think it's going to happen, so it's not wishful thinking. But as anyways, the point of this is that's ideally what I would like to see, if ever. But no, I mean, that's unlikely to happen. So you take You just deal with things as they are. But you know, basically, as I've said many times, unless we examine the underlying fundamentals of everything, you know, that is the biology, literally the physics behind it all, our origins. Political arguments are kind of wasting time on politics. It's all just twiddling thumbs. Essentially, it's not very useful. Anyway, I think I've talked enough about this. I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone. I just thought this is an interesting topic, and there you go. So, anyway, take care. Bye bye.